Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's Rabbi Akiva Males. Today is Wednesday. It is the 3rd of August. We're getting ready for Parshas Devarim, Shabbos Chazon, and that also means that Tisha B'Av is on the horizon. So this year it's going to be what we call a nidche. It's going to be pushed off one day. The 9th of Av really falls out on Shabbos, Friday night and Shabbos. But we know that there are no simane avelus. We don't observe any outward forms of mourning on Shabbos, and Tisha B'Av is all about mourning the loss of the Beis Hamikdash. We also know that we don't fast on Shabbos. The only fast that would take place on Shabbos is if we had Yom Kippur. Aside from Yom Kippur, we would not fast on Shabbos. So therefore, we have a situation where I'm just trying to get that. Okay. Therefore, we have a situation where we have called a nidche. We push off the fast and the observance of Tisha B'Av pretty much, and you'll see what I mean soon, until Saturday night, until Motzei Shabbos, when Shabbos ends. That's when we enter into our mode of mourning for Tisha B'Av, and that's also when we would begin our fast. So we're going tonight to review briefly the dinim, the halachos, the minhagim, the customs, and the rules of Tisha B'Av. We'll talk a little bit about a regular year, and then we'll also speak about what happens this year when it is pushed off and the fast in the morning does not begin until Saturday night. So let's see. I have a handout that I've prepared. I'm sorry I don't have it for those who are with us online, but it is with us here in Shul. And we'll run through this together in a systematic fashion. So first of all, it's going to talk about Erev Tisha B'Av. What goes on a regular year? Not this year, but on a regular year, the afternoon, leading into Tisha B'Av. So the first thing I have there is that there's no tachnun. Whenever we have the mincha before a Yom Tov, we don't recite Tachnun. And it's a little bit odd. It sounds odd, but Tisha B'Av is referred to as a Moed, as we're going to read in Megillas Eicha. So since it's referred to as a Moed, so we treat it like a Moed, like a Yom Tov in this regard, that we do not recite Tachnun on Tisha B'Av or on the afternoon that precedes it. Next thing I have there is Suda Mafsekes. In a normal year, not this year, but in a regular year when Tisha B'Av is falling midweek, so there's something that's called a Suda Hamafsekes, that last meal that would take place before the fast begins. Now, that's not talking about a large meal. Generally speaking, we have that large meal prior to this, and this is just a final meal. It's like a symbolic meal. In a regular year, it would take place, when does that take place? It would be after Chatzos. I have B, it's the final meal. In other words, we usually would have a large meal before that, and this is a symbolic last meal that would take place. And you want to make sure to leave room for that. And that this should be intended to be the final meal. C, I have their seating. In a normal year when the Suda Masekes is eaten, even though the fast has not yet begun, we still sit low to the ground. D, what's the purpose of that? Is to experience the sorrow in the morning of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, even before Tisha B'Av begins, to put us in that mindset. Ordinarily, what does that meal consist of? Very simple, just bread, a cold hard-boiled egg, and water. Some have the minhag, that's what I have next, have ashes with that. They'll either dip that egg into some ashes or dip the bread into some ashes. And some people will say, Zehu Seudash Tisha B'Av. This is the Seuda going into Tisha B'Av. And lastly, I had there no mezuman. Even if you would have had 3 adult males who were sitting together, they wouldn't eat together. So they would kind of each do their own thing, not eat in an organized fashion. Even if they did eat together, they wouldn't make a mezuman. They wouldn't join together to bench as a group, because again, that's seen as being inconsistent with the mourning that's taking place. Again, that's what happens at a normal Sudas HaMafsekes when Tisha B'Av occurs during the week. This year, that's not going to apply. We'll soon see what we do this year. Okay, now in a regular year again, what happens after the Suda HaMafsekes, but before sunset? Someone could sit in a regular chair, because again, the real status of mourning does not kick in till sunset. I had there, what about eating after that Suda HaMafsekes and sunset? So again, similarly, since the real fast doesn't begin till sunset, one could eat or drink. It would be best if before they bench after that Suda HaMafsekes, they either verbalize or mentally stipulate that they're not beginning their fast just because they benched. The last one I have there is remove the shoes prior to sunset. In a regular year, again, it's not going to be this year, but in a regular year, we want, as soon as sunset hits, we're already in mourning mode. So we want to have it that our leather shoes are off. Again, we're going to see that is very different this year. Now, I have here in section 2, let's just quickly review what are the national tragedies that occurred on Tisha B'Av that was the reason that, and that's referred to going back to ancient times, the time of the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. By that time in the Mishnah, there was already 5 major national catastrophes that had occurred coinciding with Tisha B'Av and that we commemorate with the fast. And this is all brought down in the Mishnah in Maseches Tanis. The Mishnah says, what were those 5? Number 1 was, this was the decree after the incident of the spies, after the Chet HaMeraglim, when the 10 of the 12 spies came back with a terrible report about the land of Israel. They demoralized everyone and people start demanding to appoint a new leader and we'll go back to Egypt. So God decrees all the adult men of that generation are going to die in the wilderness and the Jews will wander for the next 40 years before they go into the land of Israel. Our tradition has it that that decree was issued on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. The next calamity that occurred was the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed on Tisha B'Av by the Babylonians. The third calamity was that the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed over 400 years later by the Romans. The fourth calamity was years after the Romans destroyed that Beis Hamikdash. It looked like Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, were going to reinstitute a self-rule in the land of Israel. Bar Kokhba had his rebellion, and it looked like they were going to try to institute Malchus Beis David, the Davidic dynasty. That all came crashing to an end when the Romans captured and destroyed Beitar. That was a very important city at the time, and tens of thousands of Jews were murdered. And finally, the Romans plowed the site of the Beis Hamikdash. That after all these, after the Bar Kokhba rebellions were suppressed, so then the Romans, as a way to totally demoralize the Jewish people and send the message that nothing is going to change, you will not have independence, you will not have self-rule, and you will not have your Beis Hamikdash again. They went back to Yerushalayim and totally plowed over the site of the Beis Hamikdash as a way to leave no zecher, leave no memory of this, and to get out of the minds of Bnei Yisrael that something was going to change. And that was incredibly demoralizing to the Jewish people. So these are 5 national calamities, catastrophes that have coincided with Tisha B'Av, and this is what the Mishnah speaks about, and that's why we say Mishenichnes Av Mema'atim B'Simcha. When the month of Av rolls in, we minimize our joy. Okay, on Tisha B'Av itself, there are 6 prohibitions. There are 6 aspects of luxury or pleasure that we deprive ourselves of. A, eating and drinking. That's what fasting is all about, that we don't eat or drink. B, washing or bathing. That's another way that we deprive ourselves of comfort. C, anointing. This would have been much more common in ancient times where people didn't have the same hygiene that we have now. People were constantly anointing themselves in order to smell better, in order for medicinal reasons or pleasure reasons. So there was a lot of anointing that was going on. D, wearing leather shoes. If it's not leather, in the eyes of halacha, they're not considered shoes. That's why people will wear canvas shoes, they'll wear rubber shoes or synthetic materials. Those in the eyes of halacha are not considered shoes. Shoes is a luxury item, something that's associated with happy times and happy living. In the eyes of halacha, those are leather shoes. If it's not leather, it doesn't have the status of shoes in halacha. So therefore, that's something that a mourner could wear. If you went to a shiva house, you'd see a mourner who's wearing sneakers that are canvas or some synthetic material. It could be Crocs, something of that nature. That's not shoes in the eyes of halacha. I have their marital relations, meaning intimacy. That's viewed as being totally inappropriate. That's just not synonymous with being in a state of mourning, and therefore that's off limits. And F, learning Torah. Why? Because Torah causes happiness. That we say, Pekudei Hashem Yisharim Mesamchei Lev, that the statutes of God are straightforward and they gladden the heart. So because we're in Mematim B'Simcha, we're decreasing our joy in the month of Av, and in particular on Tisha B'Av. So we're going to refrain from these 6. We're now going to go through those 6, and we'll see a little bit more carefully what they mean, and you'll see that there are exceptions to each one of those. The first one I have there was eating and drinking. So what is exceptions to that prohibition? Well, if someone was suffering greatly, If someone was old and weak or may become ill, that would be a reason not to fast. There are people who ask me every year, they describe a condition that they're in. That would be reasons not to fast. This is not like Yom Kippur. It does not have the same set of stringencies there. Those could all be reasons, and I'm happy to guide people who ask me this. When we say that it's dangerous to fast, if someone's physicians let them know that it's dangerous for them to fast, that means it's prohibited for them to fast. They shouldn't be machmir. They shouldn't be stringent. Say, okay, my doctor told me not to fast, but I'm going to do it anyhow. We don't do that. Now, when we say that someone isn't going to fast for health reasons, that doesn't mean they should indulge and knock themselves out and just, bake up the ultimate dairy meal. If a person must eat, we would tell them not to indulge, but they should eat and drink enough to stay healthy and comfortable. But we're not going to tell them to really have a luxurious meal. By the way, just something comes up every year. We really always advise us, try to stay indoors as much as possible, especially here in the South, where it is very warm on Tisha B'Av. Staying indoors in air conditioning when someone is fasting could be a lifesaver, especially if, with dehydration being so prevalent. So as much as possible, for someone who's trying to fast and not eat and drink, stay indoors with the air conditioning. Next thing I have there is about rinsing the mouth. If someone's not fasting, so can they rinse their mouth? So all the sources bring down, if someone's in incredible amount of discomfort, then it would be all right. Same thing with using mouthwash, but it still would be best to lean forward while they're gargling, just so nothing accidentally slips down. Again, if a person's not in extreme discomfort, refrain for a day. But if someone's in some kind of extreme discomfort, they got an awful taste in their mouth, they're just such a comfortable living type of person that having a bad taste just totally ruins me, then you'll see it's brought down about gargling either water or mouthwash, but try to lean forward. They say that way, less likely anything will go down the hatch. Medications, if someone has medications that they need to take, then taking them without water would be the best, but that's not always so safe. There are a lot of pills that they'll say the physicians don't want people taking them without water, because if they get stuck in the esophagus and they don't get washed down, they could cause a lot of problems. So someone really should think twice before trying to take a pill without water. There are some medications that, they'll say it's not a big deal to skip a day. Others need to be taken every single day. But if it needs to go down with water, they all bring down, take a little bit of water, take what's necessary to take that down. But, again, not to indulge there. Next one I have there is washing. One of the prohibitions on Tisha B'Av was washing. We don't want to wash or bathe. Now, here's some exceptions. Let's say someone's got dirty or soiled body parts. Let's say someone was just changing the kid's diaper and some of that mess got in the hand. Absolutely, wash those hands. When Chazal said that we don't wash, that's not talking about where someone's got a specific part of the body that just got some filth on it. So absolutely wash the part that got soiled. Knuckle Water, that's Yiddish for knuckle water. That's when we wake up in the morning and we wash our hands 3 times on each side. 4 on each side. So it's brought down that, again, it would be best, unless someone's hands were dirty, just to wash until the knuckles. In other words, don't wash the whole hand, because since in the eyes of halacha, the reason we're washing that in case there's some kind of tumah that really only goes till the knuckles. So therefore, minimize it as much as possible. So doing Knuckle Water, really do Knuckle Water. Knuckle is Yiddish for knuckle. Really try to wash just until the knuckles. What about after the bathroom? Same thing, if possible, just to do until the knuckles, unless someone in the course of taking care of themselves, their hygiene, wiping, whatever it was, got some filth on their hands above the knuckles, then definitely wash that. Food preparations. So someone might say, listen, I want to prepare the meal for after the fast. And once I'm preparing that meal, I'm going to have to wash some things. My hands are going to get wet. Is that okay? So they all bring down that, yes, that's okay, because someone's not intending to wash their hands. That's incidental. They're washing the food, whatever it is that they're preparing, and they happen to get wet. Some will say, listen, if I'm already going to do that, I'll wear kitchen gloves, sink gloves, whatever that would be, just to avoid that whole thing. That would be fine too. Mikvah, could a lady go to the mikvah on Tisha B'Av? So we would say no, the night of Tisha B'Av, the mikvahs don't have appointments. Why? Because since there's no marital intimacy, since there's no one getting together that night with their spouse, there's no reason to be going to the mikvah. So therefore, there's no bathing on Tisha B'Av itself, for meaning going to the mikvah. A person will wait till the fast ends to go. What about a bride? This is an interesting point of halacha. Chazal were very sensitive that they didn't want a newlywed couple, anything to get in the way of the fond feelings they have for one another. So a bride, someone who's within 30 days of her wedding, she would be able to wash her face and anoint herself. That's an interesting exception. Okay, the next one I have there is anointing. Is that, again, one of the prohibitions that we brought down for Tisha B'Av is anointing. What does that include? Well, like lotions and creams. Let's say someone was going to put lotions or creams, shmirachs. They were going to do some moisturizers on their skin, on their hair, whatever it may be. That would we want to refrain from because that's considered luxurious. What if it was for medical purposes? Then that's okay. There's nothing here that says I can't take care of my health. It was for luxury reasons I shouldn't anoint myself. But if let's say someone has a rash and they need to put on some kind of cream because of that rash, then absolutely, they're going to put that on. Deodorant, absolutely not a problem. That's not considered anointing, so no problem with that. Have Rahmanas on the people near us in Shul. That's something that not to refrain from. 6 I have there is what about marital relations, intimacy. So again, we said that's something that we refrain from on Tisha B'Av. And I have there an A is that at nighttime, many who bring down that a husband and wife should keep the nida restrictions, meaning that what we call the harchakos. Now, it's not enough just not to be intimate, but there's a step removed, whether that meant touching each other directly, whether it meant passing something to one another. So there is a lot of sources that bring down that the night of Tisha B'Av, they should even observe as if the spouse was in that nida status. Why? Because since it's nighttime, it's so easy to just accidentally fall into rot. So Chazal said, okay, let's be careful, more careful at night. During the day, I've got their day is different. That those harchakos don't need to be kept in terms of directly passing things and whatnot. Just be on the lookout, not to be intimate with one another. 7 I have there about leather shoes is that halacha says is that since we're in mourning on Tisha B'Av, we don't wear shoes. In the eyes of halacha, shoes are considered leather. If they're not leather, they're not considered shoes. That's why mourners during Shiva, they could wear any kind of synthetic material. They could wear cotton sneakers. They could wear canvas, whatever that is. So that's not a problem. So reason again behind that is to create an intense feeling of mourning the same way people will experience during Shiva. If there's no leather on it, it's not considered a shoe. Now, the best case scenario would be there's no leather at all. Now, what if you have a shoe that there is leather on it, but it's just for decorative purposes? Like let's say someone has a pair of canvas Nikes and they got the swoosh that's on the side, it's just with leather. But there's no functional reason. If you were to take a blade and cut off that swoosh, the shoe would still be absolutely fine. That's not a problem. However, if that leather was playing an integral role, like it was holding the shoe together, it was binding the parts, then that could be problematic, even though the shoe itself might be canvas. But if, let's say, there was some component there that's actually keeping it all together, that was leather, that could be problematic. So it's something just to be on the lookout for. What about medical needs? Let's say someone has some problems with their feet or their legs, and there's a special pair of shoes they have to wear. I knew someone when we lived in Pennsylvania that had a lot of neurological problems. And he had a special pair of shoes or boots that had braces attached to them. And they were like a leather boot. And he would always feel so guilty about this. He would pull me over and say, the only reason I'm wearing this is because they have a brace. But I said, of course, you don't have to tell me. I know, but again, it just bothered him that I shouldn't have the wrong idea of him. Of course, if something's for medical needs, medical purposes, of course, those could be worn. Next item we have there is number 8. We said is we refrain from learning Torah on Tisha B'Av. The reason is, again, as we said, the pasuk says, "Pekudei Hashem in Tehillim, Pekudei Hashem Yisharim Mesamchei Lev," that the statutes of God are straightforward and they gladden the heart. And since we're in a state of mourning, it's just incongruous to be in a state of happiness from learning Torah. Now, there are exceptions. Number 1, that would be any segment of Torah or halacha which is relevant to the day of Tisha B'Av, whether that's any of the halachos of Tisha B'Av, any of the halachos of mourning, that would be absolutely fine. If it's any kind of ethical work that we would learn in order to become a better person and hopefully repair whatever it is that we've done wrong as the people that brought about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash and the dispersal of our people. So any type of a situation like that, there's so many segments of Torah that are available for a person to study. And again, we offer various Torah studies. There are segments of the Gemara that deal with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the Churban. Those are all studied on Tisha B'Av. You'll see on your schedule, Rabbi Framwitz is going to be giving a shiur for men in the Gemara that deals with the destruction of Beis Hamikdash at 7:30 before Marav on Tisha B'Av. All those videos that we show, those are really revolving around ethical speeches, trying to get us all to become better people than we were the day before. All that is absolutely fine. Those are works of Musar, works of ethics about becoming better people. That's all absolutely fine on Tisha B'Av. Now, there are numerous mourning customs that, again, that you'll see that these are observed by someone who's in a state of mourning in a shiva, and we try to do those on Tisha B'Av as well. So one of them I have there is extending greetings. In halacha, that's called she'elas shalom. That's giving another party a very warm greeting and saying shalom aleichem when you're happy to see them. That's something we want to refrain from doing. We're in a state of mourning. It's just not compatible with that. Sometimes that's very difficult, I found, on Tisha B'Av, because it's a time where people come together. It's in the summer. People may be home from school. I used to always have this problem. I was home from yeshiva visiting my parents. There would be people from the community, friends, teachers, people I hadn't seen in a long time. And all of a sudden you come to shul and you see them. It was always a challenge. So, you cannot acknowledge the other person. But to do a big warm, how you doing, Sheila Shalom, that's just not appropriate. However, not everyone knows that. So if someone extends such a real gracious greeting to us, we don't want to ignore them. We could nod back and just say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm not greeting you so warmly. It's just because of Tisha B'Av. It's just I don't feel it's appropriate. But again, don't ignore the other party. That's just not menschlich there. Next one here is merriment. Is that, again, it's not a time to be, yucking it up with our friends and chumming around. It's a day where we're supposed to be introspective, feel that, really get that feeling across that as happy as we are, as comfortable as we are, this is not the reality that God intended for us. We're supposed to be living in Israel with a Beis Hamikdash and having the Shekhinah in our midst. We don't have that. It's so hard to kind of break through because we never experienced that. We don't know what that loss is because we never had it in the first place. But just to get that realization into our minds that as good as things are, as happy as things are, as spiritually as fulfilled as we may be feeling, this is not what God intended. We're supposed to have a Beis Hamikdash. We're supposed to be in Israel, and we're supposed to have God's presence in our midst. And that's really what we want to focus on Tisha B'Av. It just would be inappropriate to now be yucking it up with our friends and having a grand old time. We have there is minimize work. That's the same idea, because since I want to concentrate on the loss and in the morning about the Beis Hamikdash and recognizing the fact that the world that we inhabit is not what God intended for us, we don't want to do something that will get our mind off of that. Now, not everyone has that luxury of taking off of work, so they always say it's best, if possible, to wait until Chatzos, which is, I think, 104 this year here, 140 here 104 here in Memphis this year. So this year, because it's a Sunday, that might be a lot easier for not everyone, but for many people, not to be engaged in work. Again, that doesn't work for everyone, but if possible, to wait till Chatzos, till midday. Next thing I have there is taking away some comfort at sleep. Again, because of the idea of trying to drive home the message that this is just not what God wants from us. This isn't what Hashem intended. We don't have a Beis Hamikdash. Some people have the custom, well, if I normally slept with 2 pillows, not for medical reasons, let's say for just total comfort, I'll sleep with 1. If I used to, I haven't done this in a couple of years, but I used to have a really fluffy comforter, and on Tisha B'Av night, I would put it on the floor and sleep on that rather than sleep on a comfortable mattress. Haven't done that in a couple of years, but that's something I used to do, and I would, that was the way I kind of tried to feel that. But if we could do something to just minimize or take away some degree of comfort that we had, it's a way of just internalizing. I'm telling myself, why am I doing this? Is because, again, this is just, we're not in the reality God intended for us. Last thing I have there is sit on a low chair within 3 tefachim of the ground. That's why a lot of people will sit on either the chairs that are used in a shiva house or on a stool, something low. Here in this beautiful new shul, look how much we have here. This is the first year we're here for Tisha B'Av, and I'm just noticing this. Look at this stairway that goes around, coming up the bima, and also by the shulchan where the Torah is read. So that's going to provide seating for people. who need that. Again, people who don't have stools to bring in. Now, if anyone has any medical reasons, their back is hurting them, their knees are hurting them, their joints are hurting them, they can sit in a normal chair. This is not absolutely required. It's something we do to, again, express our sense of loss and to help drive the message into our heads that there's something missing in our lives and there's a reason that we mourn today. Next I have is what's different after midday, Chatzos. As we said, Chatzos is at 1:04 p.m. So the next thing is that everyone who until now was sitting low to the ground, now they can sit in a regular chair. We say after Chatzos, that's when, so to say, the brunt of the Churban is now starting. In other words, we were building up to the maximum feelings of mourning, going 3 weeks to 9 days to Tisha B'Av. Now, after Chatzos, that's when we start to wind it back a bit. So that's when we could start sitting in a regular chair. Next, I have the Parochas. Starting with Mariv, when Tisha B'Av begins, the Parochas, the beautiful curtain that's in front of the Aron, that's always pushed to the side or removed. Why? Because that's symbolic. When the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, and this is what the Gemara tells us in the account, one of the things that our enemies did when they came into the Beis HaMikdash, they took their swords and they attacked and they destroyed the beautiful Parochas, the curtain that was hanging in the Beis HaMikdash. So it would just be inappropriate that we should be enjoying a beautiful Parochas when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So one of the things we do is we move it. And these are all sorts of signs and things. Kids notice this. Tisha B'Av is very, very memorable for children. They notice why we do it. The same way Pesach, we do so many things so the kids ask, and now parents have a chance to explain to the kids why we're doing something different. This is another thing that goes on. But starting from Chatzos, we return to Parochas. In other words, at Mincha, by the time we daven Mincha, the Parochas is back. Talis and Tefillin. We don't wear talis and tefillin at Shachris, the men, because why? They're described as pe'er. They're described as something which is an adornment, and someone who's in an intense state of mourning, it's just inappropriate to be adorned with something beautiful. So we wait until after Chatzos to put on our talis and tefillin. So at Shachris, we don't wear talis and tefillin, but at Mincha we do. 11, I have there, when does the fast end? At Seisa Kochavim, when the stars come out. So however we calculate when Shabbos ends, that's when we'll calculate when the fast ends. So here at Young Israel, we go throughout the year that we'll say Shabbos ends 50 minutes after the Shkia, after the sunset. So that's what we'll do here as well. So this year, we have on our calendar that the fast is going to end at 8:46. That's going to be 50 minutes after the sunset. Okay, now I've got here, because sunset is going to be at 7:56 that night, so 15 minutes later would be 8:46. Okay, now I've got on the top of page 3, Havdallah. Now again, this is when Tisha B'Av is on a Sunday. Like this year, we're going to get to this soon, that when Tisha B'Av ends, we're going to make Havdallah. Again, it's going to be not the complete Havdallah, because it's just going to be Hagafen, and it'll also be Hamavdil. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. And there's also Kiddush Levana. Again, Kiddush Levana, because again, Rosh Chodesh was this past Friday. So we wait until we didn't do Kiddush Levana. First of all, we didn't really have a Matzah Shabbos where that was an option. But even if we did, Kiddush Levana is a bit festive. We want to wait till after Tisha B'Av for that. So many people will wait till after Tisha B'Av to recite Kiddush Levana. Now, in a regular year, what happens on the 10th of Av, meaning the day after the fast? We would tell people to keep all the 9 days restrictions until Chatzos of that day, until midday. So that would mean, again, no laundry. That would mean no meat and wine. That would mean no music. That would mean no pleasure bathing. That would be until Chatzos on the 10th. That would be on a regular year. We're going to get to what's different now this year. The last section I have here is when the 9th of Av is on Shabbos. That's this year. And the fast is observed on Sunday. So there are a number of things that are different, and that's what we're going to talk about for the remaining time that we have. So I have there Shabbos. Well, what do we do on Shabbos? We have a regular Shabbos. Shabbos, we do not go ahead on Shabbos and have observable forms of mourning. So therefore, since we're not going to have observable forms of mourning on Shabbos, we're going to have a regular Shabbos. Well, what about marital intimacy? So interestingly enough, we say that really should not happen. Why? Because what do we tell mourners on Shabbos? That we don't have public displays of mourning, but Dvarim Shebetzina, matters that are private, that still is observed. And intimacy is a private matter. That's something the world doesn't know about. That's something between husband and wife. And since the actual day of the 9th of Av is on Shabbos, we would tell couples to refrain that day. The exception would be if Friday night was Leil Tevila. If Friday night was mikveh night and a wife went to the mikveh that night, then we would say they should be together that Friday night. But other than that, we would say it's best if they don't. Kiddush. What about having a Kiddush in Shul? It's Shabbos Chazon. So again, we say, even though it's Tisha B'Av, since if we didn't have a Kiddush, and it's a Shul that normally does have a Kiddush, then that would be a demonstrable form of mourning. And we don't want to have demonstrable form of mourning on Shabbos, so we still will have Kiddush on Shabbos. It would be best not to have a very festive one. So for example, and I've had relatives have had this, if let's say they're having an ufraf because they're getting married in the week after, a lot of people are getting married the week after Tisha B'Av because they couldn't get married for the 3 weeks leading up to it. So this Shabbos, should they have their ufraf? Well, there's nothing wrong with having an aliyah, but to have that big kiddush with enough of a festive thing, a lot of people, they'll push it forward to have it a week earlier. What about Torah study? So again, we said that on Tisha B'Av, there's no Torah study, but again, on Shabbos, we're not doing any visible signs of mourning. So some people bring down as follows. There's so much available in Torah study that's appropriate for Tisha B'Av, whether that was the Gemaras that deal with the destruction of Beis HaMikdash, the halachas of Tisha B'Av, the halachas of mourning, and the ethical works. If someone wants to learn any of those and they could occupy themselves with that, that's fine. But let's say someone says, I'm just not interested in that. I'm interested in something else that's not Tisha B'Av learning. It's fine because it's Shabbos, and Shabbos there's no visible signs of mourning. There's no change of schedule that has to be done. In terms of what happens at Shachris, remember we said that it's a moed, so Tisha B'Av is called a moed. So at Shachris nothing changes. At Shachris we'll still say Avarachamim, but at Mincha we won't say Tzidkas Chatzedek. Tzidkas Chatzedek is always omitted. If it was a day we wouldn't say Tachnan. And since that's a day we wouldn't say Tachnan, so there's no Tzidkas at Mincha that afternoon. Suda Mafsekes / Shalashuris. So there is no Suda Hamafsekes with the boiled egg, the ashes and whatnot, because that's a mournful meal. And on Shabbos, we don't do visible signs of mourning. So there is no mournful meal that takes place on Shabbos. Instead, what we have is a very large shalashuras. You want to eat a lot at that shalashuras because that's going to be our final meal before the fast begins. So we're going to have mincha earlier. I had in the back of the shul, but it's also been emailed out, the schedule for this year on Shabbos leading into Tisha B'Av, and you'll see that mincha is much earlier than it normally is. Mincha is at 5:45 this Shabbos. That's to allow everyone to go home and have plenty of time to have a very filling shalashudas before the fast begins. Now, what about having guests over for that shalashudas? So again, if someone normally has guests over, then to not would be have a visible sign of mourning. If let's say we're having someone over because I don't know, that's someone who doesn't have a place to eat, or that's someone, who's a single guy living in town, what is something of that nature, of course, that's not a problem. But to have a big festive shalashudas, that probably is not in the spirit of what's going on. Okay, next thing I have there is hachana. Hachana means preparing for after Shabbos. We always want to be careful on Shabbos not to prepare for after Shabbos. So there's a couple of things to be aware of for this. Number one would be, let's say, the foods. If let's say I know that, okay, I'm going to have the break fast tomorrow night, Sunday night, I want to take stuff out of the freezer now. No, it's Shabbos. I don't want to start preparing for that now because that's for after Shabbos. I want to wait till after Shabbos to do that. What about medications? Again, that's not seen as a problem. Let's say someone, this always comes up, someone has a pill that they take to help them not have a headache because of a lack of caffeine. These extended release pills, someone sells them every year. I believe it's a fundraiser for a kollel in Toronto. And the question always comes up, can I take it on Shabbos? Because I'm taking it on Shabbos, but it's not going to kick in until tomorrow morning. Is that hachana? So there's a lot written on this. They say that's okay. Last one would be shoes. That we know that on Tisha B'Av, we don't wear leather shoes. Let's say we wear canvas shoes, some synthetic. So again, we don't put on those shoes on Shabbos because that would be preparing for the fast, which starts after Shabbos. That would also mean I don't want to bring those shoes to shul on Shabbos to have them ready for. I want to give some thought in advance where I'm going to be when the fast begins, and make sure before Shabbos that's where my shoes are. If I'm going to be at home when the fast begins, we'll talk about that schedule in a minute. So my shoes will be at home. I'll put them on then. If I'm going to be at shul, then I'll bring them to shul before Shabbos, have them in the coat room or something. We'll talk about that in a minute. When does the fast begin? At sunset. Now, sunset on this Shabbos, I have it here on this schedule. Sunset is when the fast begins at 7:57. Shabbos does not end though till 50 minutes later, till 8:47. So even though Shabbos does not end, that's when sunset kicks in. So we're going to stop eating and drinking by sunset. So when we have that big shalosh at home, we want to make certain that we're not going to eat and drink anything more by the time sunset. I could have my shalosh a half hour prior to that. Just have in mind, I'm not starting my fast and eat and drink and have something until sunset, but the fast does not begin. Now, I should not take off my Shabbos shoes, and I shouldn't do anything visibly signs of mourning though until Shabbos ends, because even though I'm stopping to eat when sunset, it's still a Shabbos for the next 50 minutes. So I don't want to do anything noticeable, like change out of my Shabbos clothes, change out of my shoes, and anything like that. Marav / Havdallah. So I have there, what you'll see is normally we daven Marav here and show 5 minutes before Shabbos ends. So if Shabbos ends 50 minutes after sundown, we daven Marav 5 minutes earlier, 45 minutes after. That's what we normally do. But this year what we're doing is we're going to daven Marav later. Shabbos officially ends at 8:47. We're not davening Marav here until 9:05. We want to give time for people who went home for Shalosh to Shabbos to end, change out of their shoes, change out of their Shabbos clothes, and be able to drive with their wives or any other family members or even themselves back to shul. So we're not starting Marav till 9:05. That's when Marav is going to start. Now, what about Havdallah? So in order, what we're going to have to do is just say that formula. When Shabbos ends, when it's 50 minutes, when it was not 8:47, say Baruch Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol. Those 4 words, Baruch Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol. Shabbos is over for a person who's recited that formula. They could now change into their Tisha B'Av shoes, Tisha B'Av clothing, and get in a car and drive to shul. That's not a problem whatsoever. Once they get to shul, before we're going to daven Marav. After Marav, we're just going to make the bracha of Borei Me'orei Ha'esh. We have a Havdallah candle in my office. We're going to light it, and we're going to make the bracha of Borei Me'orei Ha'esh. If someone's not coming to shul, let's say someone's wife is home with the kids, so the husband could recite that bracha for her at home before coming back to shul. That's not a big deal. If let's say he's not able to, he's not home, whatever, if she wants, she could recite the bracha for herself. There's a lot of discussion whether women have the obligation to or not recite that bracha. So best case scenario would be if the husband recited it for her, but if for whatever reason that's not practical, there's no problem if the woman wants to recite that bracha. Okay, at that point, we're going to remove the paroches or slide it over when we daven Marav. Okay, so now we're going to have who's going to fast. So again, unless there's a reason not to, any boy or girl, once they hit bar mitzvah, they're going to fast, unless they've got a reason not to. They're not well, elderly, some illness, pregnant, nursing, whatever the case is. I'm happy to help anyone who's got any questions. Please err on the side of caution. I'm happy to help everyone who's got a question with that. Now, if someone's not fasting and they're going to have to eat, so what do we know on a regular Matzah Shabbos? We make Havdallah before we eat. So if someone's not fasting, so again, what did we do in shul? We just made the bracha of Borei Me'orei Ha'esh. We didn't make the rest of Havdallah about the Hagafen. We didn't make the rest of Havdallah with Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol. But if someone's going to be eating because they're not fasting, they really should make the rest of it. They don't do the Besamim because that's pleasurable, but they should make those other 2 brachas of the Hagafen or the Hamavdil. So what do they do about that? Well, if there's a kid around who's not yet bar mitzvah, give them the grape juice to drink. Make the Bari Pri Hagafen and let the kid drink that grape juice, because it's still the 9 days kind of. We don't want to have wine or grape juice if not necessary. If there's no child around or they're sleeping, then the adult could have that, but it would be best to minimize it. Just have like a cheekful. We're going to talk about that. If someone is only having water, let's say they're not fasting, meaning they're not going to eat, but all they just are going to have is water. They don't need to recite Havdallah to drink water. Okay, I have there in K, I have Havdallah part 2. That means after the fast concludes on Sunday night, and it is at 8:46. The fast concludes. So now the rest of Havdallah is said. Again, not the besamim, not on the spices, because that was only supposed to be said Saturday night, and we didn't say it Saturday night because we're in a state of mourning. But we made the Bari Marei Aish, we made the bracha on the candle, on the fire. So the other two brachas of Hagafen and the Hamavdil. Again, Hagafen, if there's a child around who's not yet bar mitzvah, give him or her the grape juice or wine to drink. If not, an adult can drink it. Or you could avoid the whole thing by having beer and just make a shahako instead of that. Now you may be asking why Tisha B'Av's over. Well, even though Tisha B'Av's over, we still have some of the semblance of the 9 days until the following morning. So when it comes to the 10th, this is the last point. When Tisha B'Av ends this year, because it was a nidche, because it was pushed off, most of the 9-day prohibitions can immediately be followed. So for example, a person could get a haircut right away when the fast ends on Tisha B'Av, because it already is the 10th. They could shave, they could do laundry, they could bathe, they could make a shechiyanu, they could do that right after Tzeitzah Kochaven. The only ones that we refrain from are meat, wine, and music until Monday morning. Just until Monday morning. You don't have to wait till Chatzos, just till Monday morning. That's the minhag there. So that Havdallah that's being made at the conclusion of Tisha B'Av is really the same. We tell people the same thing as what we did last Saturday night. If they want to use wine or grape juice, well, if there's a child around who's not yet bar mitzvah, it would be best give him or her that to drink. If that child's not there, no problem if the adult wants to drink it. The Ramah says it's fine. Or they could avoid the whole issue by just using beer. Make Havdallah on beer, but just make a shahako instead of a hagafen. All right, with that, I think that's pretty much a wrap up, a review of Tisha B'Av and some of the particulars of this year. I encourage everyone, I had in the back, and it was also on the magazine rack, here's a two-sided sheet that it's updated for this year with all the times needed for this year about what we need to do this year for Shabbos and Motzei Shabbos. And you'll also find there a Tisha B'Av schedule that's going to be in the bulletin this week as well. But again, this is a very helpful double-sided page that I think would save a lot of time if anyone wants to take that. All right, with that, I'm going to conclude. If anyone has any questions, if there's anything I can help with, please reach out. Please let me know. And again, if anyone has any question whether he or she should be fasting, please let's be in touch. No one wants to do something stringent which could put themselves at risk. So let's be in touch. I'm happy to help anyone that I can. Have a good night, everyone. And it should be
Thank you, Rabbi.
a meaningful fast for everyone. It should be an easy fast. There's still 2 days, so Mashiach could still come. Hopefully this will just be intellectual, and it won't have to be applied. But if it does, it should be our last fast in Golos. It should be our last Tisha B'Av. That Beis HaMikdash should be rebuilt b'mehira b'yameinu, speedily in our days. Have a good night, everyone.
Amen.